Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you've been following global events lately, you know the world's attention has been completely, absolutely locked on the Middle East, specifically the Persian Gulf, ever since the 2026 Iran war erupted. But today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look past the breaking news alerts and the political rhetoric. Instead, we are going to strictly examine the strategic calculus behind this crisis, looking specifically at how a nation facing a massive, overwhelming military bombardment attempts to construct a defense just to protect its homeland. To start, we really have to ask ourselves a highly paradoxical question. I mean, think about it. When your country is facing overwhelming conventional military superiority, why on earth would you deliberately trigger a global economic crisis by squeezing one of the planet's most vital maritime choke points? It sounds counterintuitive, right? Maybe even totally reckless. But to truly grasp the sheer scale of the disruption in the Persian Gulf, we have to look at this through the lens of asymmetric warfare and see it from the perspective of a nation desperately trying to survive. The global impact of this strategy was frankly immediate. With global trade suddenly thrown into total chaos, oil prices rapidly spiked to over $100 a barrel. That sent shockwaves through everything: agricultural supply chains, aluminum manufacturing, and literally straightened your wallet at the gas pump. But here's the thing. We need to shift our perspective for a minute. We need to see exactly why Tehran viewed this massive economic chokehold not just as some offensive lashing out, but as a necessary, calculated defense mechanism, a move designed to literally force the international community to step in and halt the bombardment of Iranian territory. Let's kick things off with Section 1, an existential threat. To really understand Iran's response here, we have to look at the staggering conventional military power unleashed by the US and Israel, which thrust an absolute existential threat directly onto the Iranian state. It started back in June 2025 with Operation Midnight Hammer, targeting key nuclear facilities. But the true massive escalation, that hit on February 28, 2026, with Operation Epic Fury. Get this. Within the first 100 hours alone, the US spent an estimated $3.7 billion on strikes. Just staggering firepower. And by March 1st, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with members of his family, were reported killed. The leadership and the very infrastructure of the nation were under an unprecedented, devastating assault. And the tragic civilian toll of such an overwhelming conventional campaign quickly became a horrifying reality, with reports emerging of a strike on a girls' school in Minabad that left 63 students dead and 60 injured. The government in Tehran was suddenly facing massive internal pressure. I mean, they were already dealing with a 52% inflation rate and a completely plummeting currency, but now they had a terrified populace on their hands. The regime had to find some way to protect its homeland from this relentless aerial bombardment, especially when they simply didn't have the air force or the air defenses to match their adversaries. Moving right along to Section 2, multi-layered defense doctrine. So what do? How does a country with a degraded conventional military protect its borders? Well, they rely on what they call the axis of resistance. Now, according to Iranian defense doctrine, which has been analyzed extensively by researchers at the INSS, this network isn't just about regional aggression. Actually, from Tehran's perspective, it's a highly calculated shield. It was built to provide strategic depth, essentially a multi-layered defense meant to keep the war beyond Iran's immediate borders. The underlying logic is that by keeping adversaries bogged down in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and the Red Sea, those same adversaries are deterred from launching direct, devastating strikes on Iranian soil. The crucial point we need to make here is the stark, almost unbelievable contrast between the two sides of this conflict. On one side, you have the overwhelming conventional might of the US and Israel. We're talking over 15,000 targets hit, advanced F-15 strikes, and literally billions of dollars in cutting-edge munitions deployed in a matter of days. On the flip side, you have Iran's asymmetric defense. Because they know they absolutely cannot win a head-to-head air war, they rely on sea drones, naval mines, proxy militias, and those fast attack boats of the IRGC's first naval zone. It is a textbook strategy of using unconventional tools to level the playing field and impose totally unacceptable costs on a vastly superior foe. Which brings us to Section 3, the economic shield. You see, when military deterrence fails, economic deterrence is deployed. And this brings us to what is probably the most disruptive move in Iran's playbook, weaponizing global trade to build a giant economic shield. Now, it wasn't just a blind, chaotic shutdown of the strait. Not at all. It was a highly selective geopolitical toll booth regime. Vessels associated with the United States, Israel, and European nations, they were aggressively blocked, boarded, or attacked. But countries like China, India, and Malaysia were actually granted safe passage. This brilliantly illustrates how the blockade was a calculated diplomatic and economic defense mechanism. by protecting the energy supplies of Asian superpowers while simultaneously choking Western economies, Tehran's goal was to fracture international consensus and force global powers to pressure the U.S. into a ceasefire.
Next up, Section 4, the human cost.
Now, stepping back from the naval maneuvers for a second, we really must balance this geopolitical picture with the human element, because beneath every grand strategic doctrine are real people bearing the absolute worst consequences. From the regime's perspective, as highlighted by senior Iranian official Ali Larijani when discussing the axis of resistance, leaning on regional militias is viewed as an absolute necessity for national survival. He emphasizes that this isn't just about controlling proxies, it's practically a mutual defense pact. In their eyes, protecting the Iranian nation and its citizens from foreign invasion requires these alliances. It's framed entirely as a matter of vital, life-or-death national security. However, we have to listen to voices on the ground, like this poignant quote from an ordinary citizen in Tabriz, which was shared with international media. It shows that ordinary Iranians are paying the highest price imaginable. While the government plays high-stakes chess in the Strait of Hormuz, regular families are absorbing the devastating costs. They are dealing with that crushing 52% inflation, punishing international sanctions, and the terrifying everyday reality of bombs dropping on their cities. They are literally trapped between a heavily sanctioned regime and the devastating military might of foreign powers.
And finally, Section 5, a fragile stalemate.
So, where does all this desperate high-stakes strategy leave the region as the dust finally begins to settle? Well, it leaves us with the Islamabad Memorandum. It turns out Iran's economic chokehold successfully forced the international community to the negotiating table, with talks mediated by Qatar and Pakistan. The terms outlined here reflect Tehran's core goals, primarily easing the unbearable pressure on their battered nation. They are demanding the lifting of crushing U.S. sanctions on oil exports and the unfreezing of assets. This comes alongside a 60-day window to discuss their nuclear program, plus the creation of deconfliction cells. So, strategically speaking, weaponizing the strait actually achieved its tactical goal of halting the immediate strikes and jump-starting dialogue. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. Iran utilized literally every asymmetric tool at its disposal, from regional proxies to shutting down massive chunks of global shipping, just to defend against overwhelming conventional attacks. But we have to ask ourselves, did this incredibly controversial defense strategy actually protect the Iranian people from harm? Or did it simply ensure the political survival of the regime at a terrible generational cost to its own citizens? It's a complex, heartbreaking question about the true effectiveness of asymmetric deterrence, and honestly, it's one the world is going to be analyzing for decades to come. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.